Hello, good evening. Here from London. It's Chloe Bruce, yet again talking for her YouTube channel about light on London, or at least I'm trying to shed light on London and the current situation in London in a global context, specifically the war in Europe, now Eurasia, the Ukraine conflict, as it has been called. Just a brief introduction. I've been posting many videos now, not just talking about my work as a natural gas journalist and an academic specialising in Russian politics with a focus on Russian natural gas politics. I've also been talking about how a good 2 decades ago, longer even, I was diagnosed in my late 20s with schizophrenia. And I've been talking about how difficult this has been. I continued my career as best I could, and I've been talking about how difficult this has been. There's terrible stigma that we all know about, but it's what doesn't help is medical professionals lying in your notes in the way I've described in many of my previous videos. It renders you speechless, and I was mute literally for 3 years after becoming homeless in 2017. And I've talked about the erosion of the welfare state, civil unrest in London and UK as a whole, and many other issues, including my speciality, Russian natural gas politics. So today, yes, I just want to talk a bit more about London and, let's say, the UK. I'm in London here. The civil unrest, and a few words about how London officials, Whitehall officials, continue, as I've said before, to bury their head in the sand when it comes to all these very pressing, life-threatening issues. And I've described this in a previous video quite recently as a sort of ostrich policy. They still won't take their head out of the sand. And I'll make a short discussion here of some of my thoughts about recent events and the situation now in Russia, Kursk, and Ukraine. So I think it was in the Elvis Presley movie recently, the quite recent Elvis Presley movie, that they sang the song Snowman's Coming. And it's a wonderful song, Snowman's Coming, it seems to be called. And I do not fully understand it, but I like the concept of Mrs. Snow, which seems to be the person narrating the whole song. She calls herself Mrs. Snow, who is really there, she says, in all other seasons. I think you know where I'm going. It might seem summery and warm, time for a holiday, a little staycation in Britain, but we have to understand this winter is going to be very difficult if the conflict continues. So Ukraine. So Mrs. Snow, she says, is there in all seasons. And Ukraine itself, like Russia, is very experienced in the art of functioning in extremely freezing weather. It's also an incredibly cold country. And when the wind changes, even in quite warm summers, significantly more summers there in Kiev, from south to east, when the east wind picks up there is still an instinct to tie a warm scarf around your ears, and as though the frost has sort of started nipping at your face and head. It is just, for some reason, you catch the east wind a lot, even in summer, say in Moscow or Kiev. And the coldest I have ever experienced was in Moscow. You may recall I've talked in previous videos how I lived there in my late teens, working my gap years following my completion of my A-levels here. And the coldest I experienced there was significantly cold, as you can imagine, minus 32 degrees. It can get a bit colder in Moscow, not much more, but of course then you've got Siberia. I think it could be over minus 50 in Siberia or less. So, but I did nevertheless manage to get into work that day, and the travel agent I worked in then as a travel agent, business travel agent, near the Lubyanka area in central Moscow. I should imagine Russia itself knows it is up against Ukraine's own brand of Mrs. Snow. The weather is always, I should imagine, used as an advantage or disadvantage in military conflict, especially in a zone with extreme weather. And I think it's not my own research, but there are many accounts, I think, of the Second World War, and as the foe marched on Moscow, they, of course, being Europeans, or Western Europeans, got caught out by the most deadly winter. And I think it was a fact I read in a history book that when I go to Russia, I push boots on at least one size up so I can fill them up with warm socks, several pairs of warm socks. But the Germans apparently were in poor attire and had the correct size, and while the Russians were filling their boots up with newspapers, they were losing their feet on the other side. The German army had terrible problems combating the snow, and at the end of the day it cannot be anything but a major factor. And I suppose also, even with modern technologies, they are sometimes weather contingent in some ways. I do not fully understand Ukraine's relatively recent decision to invade Russian territory. Kursk, they say. They're in Kursk. I don't know about other parts of that area, but they're in Kursk, and invading further in was the last I heard in the news. I haven't watched it this evening, but yes, that's the last I heard. They're moving further into Russia. And it was my thought, I was wondering why they're timing it now, why that particular manoeuvre. And I thought they might be, it's just idle speculation, I've not studied war at all, but I thought they might be sort of ahead of winter. They might be trying to circle and trap Russian soldiers in Ukraine ahead of winter. In other words, they've still got, of course, these Russian soldiers situation in Russia. What if they circle them off around the Russian border to Ukraine and trap them in there in winter without supplies? It's coming very quickly. It'll be very cold by the end of September in that region, I think, if I remember my own experiences. Sort of freezing them out as a potential. You can see that it's possible they'll just freeze them out at that point, when you consider that corrupt forces try to use energy tactics to disable the Russian army, namely bombing infrastructure. But this energy situation, we see reports of bombing of the energy infrastructure in Ukraine and now in Russia. I think oil facilities and other types of infrastructure related to energy. But these situations with this part of the conflict, but there are historic situations with energy, not my area of Russian gas politics that I've described in previous videos. I mean literally attempts to corrupt the Ukrainian energy systems, and I've discussed how they don't have, unlike Russia, they have very little in the way of oil and gas of their own. They have to import, but they nevertheless have suffered some corruption. Other academics, at least one, has discussed their situation, and I alluded to it briefly in my thesis, and I've published parts of this which I've discussed in previous videos. So you can imagine them being frozen out when it was these corrupt forces that destroyed the energy systems as best they could, or at least they attacked parts of it for whatever strategic reason was there. If my memory serves me correctly, the Russian President Vladimir Putin said before this escalation of conflict, before this latest phase, or if you want to call it the new war in Ukraine, he said that he made a comment very angrily that Ukraine was committing genocide against Russian civilians living in eastern Ukraine, and they were lifelong there. They're people who literally have made their life there all along, parents there, historically there, but they're nevertheless Russian. And they may hold Russian passports even, or dual passports, I'm not sure. But he said that they were committing genocide by threatening to cut off their natural gas, and I place this in the context of these bitter, bitter winters. It's for their cooking also. And that would be horrific, of course, to deprive, for whatever reason, language bias, historical grievances, a leverage on Putin and his decisions to threaten the Russian civilian population even prior to the outbreak of this war. But I didn't see all the details of this tragic situation. I didn't know the verity of the comment. I didn't know all the details. That's literally just one statement. But I've long wondered what would happen if in winter civilians, literally just for whatever reason, didn't get their gas supply that day. I was wondering what would happen. And it's obviously a very focal point, how to survive winter in these very cold countries. However, Ukrainian energy experts, luckily, know their grids and winter fuel situation. Obviously, extremely well enough to be supremely organised in the cold. And my prayers are with anyone experiencing cold this winter, because it doesn't bear thinking about. We keep having terrible near misses with Ukrainians freezing, or Russians these days freezing in the winter. It doesn't bear thinking about. Russian civilians, let's say, freezing in the winter. It doesn't bear thinking about. And remember, even in the European Union, a colder than average winter, and I mean European Union, I suppose up to a point Britain also, in the European Union, in the EU, a colder than average winter can up natural gas prices still further as supplies dwindle and gas has to be taken from storage to meet this increased demand for heating. And it can also be the same, particularly in hot regions, if they're using lots of aircon in a particularly hot summer, then also they may have to use more gas and there'll be more demand, and then I should imagine usually the prices would go up at that point still further. And I've talked previously about the energy price situation, particularly natural gas prices in Britain and presumably elsewhere in Europe, how high they've been as a consequence of various factors, including this particular conflict and Middle East unrest. We would draw, I think gas was difficult to store gas because it's gaseous, and I understand when I was working as a gas journalist there was only one way to store it, in salt caverns underground, and luckily these are voluminous and the system works well, but nevertheless it's costly to put the gas into storage, and to withdraw it from storage you still have to pay for the storage, pay for those services of releasing it from storage, as I understand it, or it was back then. I wish I knew what Ukraine was doing for fuel this coming winter. I don't know how they're fueling this situation, and this and clearly this Kursk invasion will, in my view, weaken Russia, and create at least, I hope, a thaw one day where both sides accept peace. In other words, if they keep putting pressure on and forcing Russia to change its plans over and over and stay strong and stay committed to their plans, I should imagine that thaw will one day happen. It will have to happen one day, and relationships, of course, a good person in Russia will have a good person in Ukraine, and that's a fact. However difficult, they will see past, and vice versa, they will see past the conflict and know that they have relatives, friends, of course, very similar in life and history to themselves. I think, I can't be sure, I'm not really the best military analyst, I'm not looking at it currently, particularly as I say, I'm off work, but I think Ukraine will lose maybe some territory longer term in a peace deal, but will make very good progress in building its economy and extracting the best deal out of this dire situation. I think it will have to lose some territory, but not necessarily the most economically crippling part of things. That couldn't be anything but untenable. I think a deal will involve some changes of geography, but I can't be sure, of course, and we hope for the best whatever happens. With all this going on, London continues a petty attack on its citizens by creating extreme hardship, and despite UK media saying energy prices were set to fall, there is perhaps already a clear upward trend taking place since this newly elected Labour government. And I should imagine, I think personally, that natural gas prices for the end consumers will increase this winter as the Middle East unrest takes its toll, and there's a knock-on effect in the future to natural gas prices and affecting end consumers, even with energy price caps and that kind of manoeuvre to offset hardship, if that's a credible way of approaching it. That's my personal opinion. I don't expect any let-up of these high prices in this region. And we have the newly elected Labour government spouting nothing but a kind of what I call weakonomics, a horrifically weak approach to this dire situation we're all in here. They have plans to remove the energy price cap. Why put it on in the first place? Couldn't you have let natural market forces come into play and be more diplomatic in your whole approach to world affairs? And they want to take away fuel subsidies from the elderly, etc., etc. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, seems bleakly weak amidst all this pain, with the Chancellor actually saying, with astonishing levels of indifference, that her policies will continue to hurt, and yet she continues to look back, as a Conservative might, at the past, looking at the Conservatives and talking about them and their legacy. And it's just astonishingly weak, the whole way they're approaching things. I don't know who they are. I'd like to know more about them. Yes, and from what I was able to observe, the press devoted vast amounts of airtime on TV to Keir Starmer and seemed to resent Rishi Sunak even when he was Prime Minister. Enough to mention all the negatives of Rishi Sunak and his policies. I liked the fact that he talked ahead of all this strife about a very divided Britain, a parallel world in Britain, which I brought to the attention of various people in a letter in 2017 and to the Home Office. I said there was a parallel society then with a parallel housing system. And so I agreed with this. I'm not sure if he meant exactly what I said, but he was making the point that some people, it's not just left out a few people, which is also despicable. They're leaving out everyone because they're going ahead over the head of democratic laws and implementing policies that couldn't possibly be credible, technical, or anything that would help the current situation. All they do is about hate and criticism. They have nothing nice to say about anyone, not even each other. And I'm talking about the details missing in the press of these policies in Rishi Sunak's reign. And were there any positives? Could they not have cited why his voters still voted for him, or a bit more about the electoral analysis? I see in my area Labour got in, and supposedly, and I voted Green, and I didn't want Tory or Labour. I voted Green, although they were the only one really that I wanted to vote and use my vote. But anyway, it was the vote that seemed the least of many bad pathways. Voted Green, and I don't know what happened to these Green votes or the other parties' votes. I don't know what happened to them. They seem to be negligible in a sea of love of the local MP, and I can say that's not actually what I think. People don't think there's any love lost. Anyway, so I'm talking about these details missing in the press. Well, of course, there's this great big story, a deliberately distracting ongoing story that I've discussed in previous videos, the great immigration debate, as though immigrants are still the problem. This is simply absurd. It cannot possibly be the problem. British people are also experiencing hardship. It's not because of immigration. It's bad policies, bad economic policies, and hate for everyone, and very little gratitude for anyone in work, and a lot of criticism people who have worked their hardest, like I have, only to come unstuck because they're under the weight of hate for anyone called mentally ill. And so that's one of them. Or the consumption, yes, always say a sort of and there's another distracted debate, or the Rishi Sunak proposition of conscription for the young people of Britain, mandatory conscription, which we don't have currently in the UK. It wouldn't be mandatory, it'd be voluntary, but there'd be obviously pressures maybe to take that job, would you then get benefits? Would they say, no, then another option is open to you, then get benefits if you refuse to enter conscription, military, but you, on the other hand, don't find another job elsewhere? Is that the only option open for some people? I see UK politics today like a kind of Snow White apple, the apple in Snow White, half red as they veer towards Stalinist behaviour, and half green, endless debates about climate, the evils of fossil fuels, ironically. While they never seem to actually grasp these topics at all, they could talk about a bit more lovingly about some of the American NASA space program. They don't love our AI or our space programs. Couldn't they at least like other countries' space programs? It's one of the most astonishing revolutions I've ever known when it comes to technology. There we are, looking at potential new places to inhabit and potential new energy sources up there. I can even imagine a bizarre water energy up there, oddly enough. It is, I know that sounds preposterous, but I actually can imagine water energy somehow being found, not necessarily, or wave energy, let's say, from a liquid. And there may be many, let's say, asteroids that contain many minerals that prevent us having to mine, and lithium, all kinds of things that would be useful. And what about the prices of renewables? Can't you analyse how well we're doing maybe with some of these technologies? How innovative and clever they are, how hopeful they are. Can't you look at the rocket Nadezhda, Hope? I think it was launched from the Gulf. I can't remember. I think it might be a Ukrainian, Russian or Polish project. I don't know. It means hope. And I saw it launched. It's extraordinary. We've got images now from the dawn of time, and yet they're pettily debating immigration. I can guarantee there's room for everyone. I don't know physics well, but I do think physics has never been anything but loving of the planet, because it's a wonderful place with room for everyone. It just is the way it works. So this apple, half red as they veer towards Stalinist behaviours, and half green as they have a futile debate about fossil fuels, attacking the energy sector for digging more, when in fact over and over again, when all they have to say is look ahead a bit at the other investments in energy, maybe by these very same companies. The way we're approaching renewables right, is spectacular. I watch science. We don't see it in our mainstream media. No, I see science press, YouTube channels, and also some science documentaries, and they have extraordinarily interesting things about cars, how they'll be powered. It's not what people think. Hydrogen, I don't know. Just a sec. Hello, I've just resumed. Sorry about that. There was someone perfectly expected, but I forgot about it, who I was expecting to ring at this point, but they have gone now. So just to continue, yes, I was talking about this great situation with science, a lot of hope. It's terrifying, the reliance on fossil fuels that we've had historically, but there is a lot of positives going on in the attempt to eliminate them. Behind, not because politicians say, oh, let's override ULEF, or let's override this policy and stick to our guns with using fossils. No, it's because behind the scenes everyone's working very hard for a very lucrative, good and also beneficial area, not the ideal itself either, which is other forms of energy, and including space exploration, which might be extremely beneficial in many respects. It could expand our wealth, and help to have wealth, for good wealth prospects for everyone, as well as an easier way of life. I even saw such as the hate of, they're going on, is AI a good thing or a bad thing? The fact is, I'd like my medical conditions, whatever they are, to be cured. It could be the difference between brain damage and a good, healthy life, AI, in its decision-making medicine. We know the criticism, they come from top experts. They're very frightened about some parts of it. The fact of the matter is, it's an immature essay that wouldn't even get an A at GCSE levels. AI, well, some people say, and some people don't. They don't say who these people are. I think they're on social media, some kind of quasi-science, pop science. It's bizarre. And one BBC presenter, I think it was on the BBC, was so upset about NASA failing in one of its launches. It sort of issued vitriol. NASA failed to launch. It's just the most unpleasant attitude I've ever known towards science innovation and prospects that benefit all. You know, she couldn't see a benefit to her or something, and so it's not worth reporting on a chronic basis. I think it was the BBC or it may have been Sky, but anyway, I saw that at one point. And there is indeed in the UK media, the TV medias, very little details on the race to become opposition leader, that is, of the Tory, the Conservative Party. I talked in recent videos about a bizarre civil war here that has been noted in the press elsewhere, that I'm in. I'm actually in this civil war. Yet the media has minimised this and implied that when Elon Musk saying that UK civil war is now inevitable, they implied that he was deliberately trying to misinform people, including youngsters, with a useless discussion day in, day out of how, and at the political level, politicians also joining the debate about how to educate children about social media misinformations in the context and in light of Musk's comments, which was what many of us did. Well, I think the inevitability of civil war in Britain, and I know that because I'm in it. I'm trying to say that. And in the context of this civil strife and these riots and these demonstrations and these attacks, I distinctly watched in a pre-election debate a representative, I'm pretty sure it was a Scottish National Party representative, one of them. I couldn't see it well because they didn't show the banner stating his name, or someone I'd never heard of, his name or party clearly, and they would start talking, don't know which party they're representing. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it said SNP. Anyway, what he said, and this was before the election, before Labour was elected in, while Tory was still in power, oddly enough, they often forgot that too, they were still the ones in charge of policy making until the inevitable happened. He actually said, I call on people to rise up against Nigel Farage's party. Reform UK, I think it's called. I've got a memory like a sieve these days. But anyway, Nigel Farage's party, which has an immigration focus. It cannot be decoupled, these comments rise up, from recent civil unrest, with one side yelling refugees not welcome here as some kind of stubborn refusal to see that as anything exciting, while crowds have now started, or were starting on quite regularly, building up outside the offices, some offices of his party, of Nigel Farage's party. He has the right to an opinion. No one has to like it. They don't have to vote for him. What they don't have to do is trying to cancel him in the way they are. He is, you know, he's not necessarily the voice of all his representatives of his party. He's speaking his opinion. He might be within the law in terms of what he's saying. They don't have to say to attack this man and rise up against him. It's plurality, and we need way more plurality in British politics, and some parties don't get a look in terms of coverage on the media. We don't even know some of their names. They're there, and they could be, even if they're not sort of, if you can't see them on an election list, they could have a bit more profile prior to this. As I voted a while back for a local election for an animal rights party, and there are all kinds of things that could be discussed, all kinds of ways of sort of improving plurality, but we can't do it without a free and fair media in a context of eroding democracy here. So this is that particular situation. It can't be taken outside of this hate rows, these race rows between politicians. I've said in my previous videos, or one of them, the politicians are getting away with horrific situations, including the barge in the Home Office under the Conservative Party concocted as a solution to wishing away the immigrant housing crisis, when in fact the British population has had housing crises even when they're in full-time employment, like myself, and prior to living abroad to work there as a journalist. Life is a mocktail here in London. It's like a mini EU with petty squabbles and little genuine policy decisions little policy decisions would help change things for the better. As people complain here of a Victorian-style poverty, with just a sort of, from the government's committees, I see it's a bit difficult, thank you. I can say that my own discontent is only getting worse. I've discussed this. It may seem out of the blue. It is not. I have discussed the history of how difficult this country has been for many people, and how hypocritical the government is, and how their hate of anyone competitive to them who shows them up as what they are, inefficient, underqualified. I have one MP I tried to research her and her credentials. She's got nothing about her degree, nothing about her education, just a list of charities. When does she earn any money? You're not meant to earn any money for working for a charity. You're meant to be a philanthropist, giving. You're not meant to take from the charity. It is getting worse, because I still have knocks on the door, not this occasion, but I still have knocks on the door. I'll explain this. It is not just the outside of the snow white apple. It is rotten to the core. I won't have my heating or hot water on this winter, not because I can't afford the hot water, let's say. I don't put my heating on. It's difficult I very rarely put the overhead light on. I tend to get to bed before it goes dark to avoid that situation with the energy bills. It's not for that reason. It's because the council has refused to accept, in writing to me, the fire brigade's discussion with them and analysis, their criticism that they had unnecessarily badly installed my boiler in my flat here, in the council flat I live in. And for some weeks, even months, I had a CO leak, a carbon monoxide leak. And you might be able to see in my first video, I'm gasping for breath, not knowing what was causing this. I thought I was unwell physically. I think I was unwell physically. But it wasn't, it was CO. I couldn't even do my exercises without gasping. The breath would stop there. And yet still, this council, Wandsworth Council, spends, in the context of all these vast numbers of councils in Britain going bankrupt, they still send useless letters patronising their tenants with nothing done and no information or no genuine discussion of what's going on. They always ignore it. The letter is nothing to do with the complaint. It is something that they have a gripe about, and never, ever anything useful. For example, a letter I got that didn't address the CO poisoning, the badly installed boiler, the dangers of the public. It didn't bother. It completely buried its head in the sand also. Just a sec. Yeah, so it's a sort of we're all going on a summer holiday here in Britain with petty squabbles, with endless criticism of the Russian regime, when in fact the good-natured, as we know, civilians in Ukraine and Russia face a Jack Frost this winter that is never seen here by us. Those soldiers who have unwittingly, those who were unwittingly involved in this Europe, now Eurasia also conflict, know the danger they're in when winter falls. And all we can do is go on and on about the electoral legacy. When diplomacy is needed, the war has to end. Britain has to actually prove it's also a strong democracy, instead of hypocritically insulting other regimes, including the Putin regime, as much as it can, not seeing any positives in Russia. None of the policies are discussed, none of the nitty-gritty, none of the difficult parts of analysis. No, it's just criticism, 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 and of each other. And if they want to lower the price of energy here in Britain and stop that particular dynamic affecting the people in hardship, then what they might consider is, instead of inflaming the fire by saying we're going to recruit our youth to fight against Putin, what they might say instead is, we can see our own flaws also, thank you. And they might give us a better standing when it comes to analysing and criticising other regimes. Ukraine genuinely has this situation. I don't know why you have to court trouble with Russia when they weren't actually firing rockets at you. Some have that, some don't. And I don't think there's room for complacency thanks to our own inefficient, stagnant Stalinist regime. But I can't really complain about this boiler. I'm just having cold showers and not having the heating on. I've even sort of thought about there's lots of pressure here to save water, even though we're a rainy country. And there's now shampoos used by NASA. I ordered them online, and they're not a dried shampoo. It's just a sort of thing that you don't need water for. It's a shampoo that you just rub through your hair. It's literally not a dry shampoo, it's a sort of cream, and you just towel it off afterwards and it cleans your hair. I'm not saying my hair looks great from it, but it cleans it and does a more or less good job. And there's also a NASA product for the washing the body too without water. You just put on this lotion and then you dab it off with a special towel they provide, and that saves water and electricity and that kind of thing, and it's perfectly okay, I find, although I do miss sometimes the water, of course. I haven't done it that often, but I have showers more often than using that technique, but it's there if you're really worried about your heating or water bills. So I can't really complain about my boiler when I know we have a mild climate, a very long history of democracy, everything to be positive about, and yet all they have to do is take from the people while criticising them and their work effort at the same time by never having historically paid them even what they should have got when it comes to the cost of living in London. So I know it's desperate when it comes to these chilly countries who exhaust themselves keeping their people warm enough. And what I'm saying is, please remember the exhausting efforts for Siberian or Ukrainian people working in the natural gas industry to do one thing for their population, if they're going to do anything, keep them warm and at winter, and that they can do well and efficiently. But all we ever hear is our energy price cap without looking at the genuinely root causes of this problem in any significant detail. Thank you. I'm sorry for the poor picture quality because of the lighting. I hope things were visible. Thank you for listening today, and I do hope you'll find more of my videos interesting, and the future ones also. Thank you. Have a good day or night.